I think when you think about rest and you think about relaxation, you also have to talk about worth and value.
Yeah.
Because especially in our country where you only may get 14 days of vacation a year, and then you're not even expected to take those full 14 days, right?
Yeah.
I go to church, I go to therapy, I pray, I go to yoga, I do all of the things, right?
Wow, good for you.
I call on all of the power. So part of that is like, it's routine, it's ritual, it's good for me, it's part of my self-care.
Do you remember what it feels like to be comfortable in your own skin? Not just confident, but also pain-free, relaxed, healthy, and carefree? Think about the most robust version of your own childhood body. This is what Lifeyness feels like, a joyful spirit and a vibrant physical state of being. I'm your guide, Professor Sarah, storyteller, teacher, and wellness enthusiast. Reach into the vitality of your own girlhood to supercharge your grown-up life. I am so thrilled about today's guest. But before we get started, don't forget to follow me on Instagram and TikTok now at Book of Lifeyness. So a couple months ago, I attended an event here in Jacksonville, Florida called Untold Stories. It's this wonderful gem of a performance produced by WJCT and Florida Theater with my friend Barbara Colicello as artistic director. And this is like an oral storytelling event where just a handful of folks, maybe like 3 or 4, they each tell a compelling, well-crafted story that has not been heard, and each of them was so good. But it was Nikesha Elise Williams who stood out to me. It wasn't her 2-time Emmy-winning background in news production or her prolific career as a novelist or even her status as a fellow podcaster, and a really good one, that stood out to me the most. It was the way she spoke about her 2 children and the things she said about indulging in the joyful moments of life, even in the face of fear and uncertainty, that really caught my attention. You see, Nikesha used to work in news production, and it was her job at one point to view footage of the most horrific events unfolding in the streets of our country. Police brutality and school shootings. Just a lot of firsthand footage sent from personal iPhone videos. To see innocent people brutalized over and over did something to Nikesha, and she finally had to make a decision. And we'll hear about her story here today. But years later, she seems to have come to a place of peace and understanding when it comes to her own life, to feeling safe, feeling joyful, protecting and enjoying her children, taking care of herself, as well as nurturing this blossoming career as creator and author. I believe, especially now after getting to know her a little bit, that this woman has something to teach all of us, but especially for young mothers, Black families, and anyone else who may need clarity in the face of a world that can seem so brutal and ugly, or just sometimes it's just a constant grind. She knows there are ways to care for yourself, to find space to be gentle with yourself and your family, even knowing how scary the world can be, just claiming those joyful moments for her own. She knows how important it is. I personally believe joyful parenting can be a form of resistance, and that finding ways to be playful at home and practicing true self-care, not just massages and shopping and things like that, but true self-care can perhaps outweigh all that doom scrolling and the anxiety that sometimes can wrap itself around our throats. So I see in Nikesha a different way of being, like a different way to face the world. I see that she's created something for herself. So this is why I asked her to come on the show, so I could learn more myself and also have her share it with all of you. Please welcome with me Nikesha Williams, author of Mardi Gras Indians, podcaster of the amazing and dynamic show Black and Published, and mother of 2 young children, as we discuss joyful parenting, establishing boundaries, being a creative, and living honestly and unapologetically as a joyful human being. Well, first of all, thank you for joining me on the podcast. I'm like so happy that you took some time for me. That's amazing. For sure. And when I heard you speak, I first identified with you as a mom because, like, I think you mentioned, you had 2 kids.
My son is 8 and my daughter is soon to be 2. And she's so picky. So like in the morning, I'm getting her dressed and then I'm trying to put on her clothes. No, brother. And I was like, well, go let him put it on.
Oh, that's so good. Yeah, he's such a big help.
He's a great help, and he really loves her and really wants to be there and protect her and all those things. So it's amazing to see.
And one of the things that really sparked my attention was you seem to really indulge in the joy that they bring you. So as my first question, I just wanted to talk to you about that. Like, why do you think it's especially relevant for you as a woman, as a Black mother? Why do you think it might be especially relevant for parents right now to indulge in joyfulness and joyful moments with their kids?
Because the world is trash, right? Absolutely. Like, let's just call a spade a spade. The world is trash and America is the ghetto. But beyond being snarky, like, there are a lot of scary things that are happening in the world, in our country, in our state, in our city. And so and I say that because I come from a television news background. And so I've worked and been, distanced a touch from some of those scary things. I've worked stories and they've become cases that are like national and blown out, or even like your local murders. Like, I've seen some of those things. And so I know how dark and scary the world can be, the dangers that are out there. And I don't want to put that on my children. I want them to, especially as Black children, I want them to know happiness. I want them to know joy. I want them to know carefree living. And as much as I can prevent it, I don't want them to know struggle. I'm originally from Chicago, grew up in the 90s on the South Side in a neighborhood that some may call the ghetto, some may not, but my mother and father didn't raise my brother and I that way. But, there were things that happened on our block and in the neighborhood. There are still things that happen on our block and in the neighborhood that don't happen now where I live in Jacksonville. But even in those happenings, I still had a childhood where I played outside. I had friends and that type of thing. And my mother, God bless her, indulged me in pretty much anything I asked to do. And she said I didn't ask for much, and I get to think that's probably still true. I don't ask or require a lot, but there are certain things that I want to do, and I do them. And so I try to do the same for my children. Like my son, he doesn't ask for a whole lot, whether it's to go to a movie, to go to the park, to do basketball camp, to just have me walk to the bus stop and walk home with him instead of driving. I try to do those things for him because it's not too much to ask for. And I think especially as Black children, I know there's this whole movement of parents saying, I'm raising free Black children. I get it, but I don't really like it because at some point the world is going to break their souls. And I laugh, but I mean, it's going to happen in one way or another. It could be small, it could be large, but only they will be able to determine their reaction. But I say all that to say is that even though I am remiss in saying I'm raising free Black children, I am very conscious and cognizant of how I show up in the world, how they will show up in the world, and making sure that they know that they have those foundational principles of love and joy and happiness and carefree spirit and curiosity and exploration, so that the lights are always shining in their eyes. I don't want to break my children. I know that's a thing in some Black families, and even older, it's like, you break your children before the world does it, so they know how to react when it happens. I don't want to break their spirits. I want to give them the things to make them resilient against the breaking.
Oh, I love that. It sounds like your parents gave you that security, that baseline security. And that's what you're doing with your kids. Like, you're giving them a particular baseline to, like, kind of, you're setting it so they know what joy is and they know what happiness is. So you're modeling it for them. Yeah.
And like, I have to show up that way too for them. So I have to show up fully as myself, not just their mom, but as who I am as a woman, who I am as a writer, all those things. And I have to, verbalize and say what's going on. So like, my son will sometimes ask me, are you stressed? No. And so like, I have to differentiate, like, no, I'm not stressed. I may be overwhelmed. No, I'm not stressed. Maybe I'm frustrated, because stress is a label and it is a killer. But, sometimes you have to differentiate what it is exactly, to me, for me anyway, that you're feeling, that I'm feeling, and be able to name it and acknowledge it, so that it doesn't have power over me, and that I can have power over it.
Yeah. As a wordsmith, that's so important, right? Like, for you to model that, because I think that's also a mental health technique, is instead of saying I'm mad, saying I'm aggravated, or I'm, or I'm hungry. If you name that, then you're like, oh, easy fix. Okay, we're going to eat now. So yeah, that's beautiful. I love that. So do you, and you kind of touched on this a little bit, but do you consider joy as a form of resistance in, like, your writing or personal life, either one?
I don't think I'm the best person to answer this question, but I do see how it can be a form of resistance. I would defer to Tracy Michelle Lewis Jiggets. She wrote the book called Black Joy, and she talks about joy as resistance, joy as resilience, joy as restoration. It's an essay collection. I actually interviewed her on Black and Published.
Did you? Awesome.
I did, yes. So I would defer to her on that, but I do see how joy can be an act of resistance. I think about, it was a few years ago, 2018, 2019, when folks were calling the police on Black people for like cookouts and music and things of that nature, all of that. And it's like, they were still going to do it anyway. We're still going to gather. We're still going to play the music loud. We're still going to talk loud. We're still going to barbecue this food, all these things. Like, that is an assemblage of joy, despite a person or forces or a
fear,
system of thinking or fear that would say, well, you have to shrink yourselves so that you can survive, right?
Right.
I think for so long as Black people, the emphasis has been on survival and making sure you come home at night. And some of that is still there. I mean, post George Floyd, some of that is still very much there. But I think in resisting that fear and taking on that, we need to stay in our place and shrink ourselves and only stay in this box, there has been an outgrowth of, you know what, I'm going to show up and I'm going to be even louder about it. I'm going to be even more big and more bold. I think about how in 2020, after George Floyd's murder, all the Black Lives Matter murals went down on the ground, like in New York and in Chicago and in Washington, D.C. And so like now it's Black Lives Matter Plaza instead of whatever the street used to be called, right? And yes, that's where the protests were staged. But then also I look back at pictures from them, and that's where there's soca and there's drummers and there's people dancing and there's people laughing and being in joy. So yeah, we can cry and we can protest and we have pain, but we're going to laugh, we're going to sing, we're going to dance. And I think having that balance and making sure that joy is tipped a little bit higher is what I think as a culture, perhaps we're moving toward.
Yeah. Yeah. Because you can get too caught up in the seriousness of, you know, traditional, what resistance looks like. But, you know, what are you fighting for? It's the joyful moments, right? To preserve those. The other day, you know, just reading about that boy who went to the wrong house. He is exactly my son's age. And the fear, I can imagine, just like, you know, it's like, I just want my son to come home. Like, I can imagine, you know, putting that on children because you just want your kids to come home. You know, I know you touched on this a little bit in Untold Stories, your background in news. It could have easily tipped you the other way into fear because, you know, it's like, this happens in our world. We send our kids to schools where, you know, other kids bring guns to school. I love the idea of tipping it more in joy and remembering that's what we're kind of like fighting for. Okay, let's get into kind of like you in particular. How do you prioritize self-care, rest, relaxation, fun in your daily life?
It's something that I'm doing more of now. I guess I can say it. I'm recently divorced. But in going through the acceptance that my marriage was ending, was over, and that neither of us was willing to do the work to truly repair it, you know, that's a kind of process. And unfortunately, that process coincided a lot with the birth and then, you know, the raising of my daughter. Like, she's only one, like she's 22 months, like, and exactly. So it's like, you have a baby, get divorced. Like, that was not the plan. Right. But in having her and going through that and getting divorced and going through this entire process, I've been very intentional about making sure I'm taking care of myself. I used to dance as a child, and because of dancing and trying to fit a certain mold and doing ballet and those things, I did harmful things to myself, so that my vision of myself is sometimes distorted when it comes to body image. And I'm also an emotional eater. So like, those things they happen. And so after having my daughter and realizing my marriage was over, I was eating to numb the pain, and then I wasn't able to work out because she wasn't in daycare. She was home all the time. And so when she finally did go to daycare, I think that was when I really started to begin the physical work on myself. I am a spiritual woman. I do go to church. I do pray. I do claim Christianity. So I've always had a spiritual practice, but it's been as of late when my prayer life, my meditation through yoga, and my writing, journaling, all of that have kind of become in sync so that I make sure that I'm taking care of myself inside and outside. So I go to church, I go to therapy, I pray, I go to yoga, I do all of the things, right? I call on all of the power. So part of that is like, it's routine, it's ritual, it's good for me. It's part of my self-care. And then more recently, you know, I talked about this in Untold Stories. I did go to the concert, the Janet concert last Friday, went with some girlfriends. We had a great time. Some of the pictures are on Instagram. Most of them will never see the light of day.
Sounds like a great time.
We had a time, okay? But like, making time for those moments for myself where I want to say, you know, I want to do this thing, and I do it and I figure it out. And, you know, I love my children, but they can't always come with me. Right. They can't always be a part, because I feel like motherhood is a title and a role and a label that consumes you as a person.
Yeah, it could.
And I want my children, especially my daughter, to know that you can still be who you are as a person and not be consumed by the responsibility given to you because you are a mother.
I love that. Yeah.
So
that's so important.
I try to make time for that as well. And then making sure that, if I know my body is aching and I want to take a bath, but the shower is quicker, it's like, no, you can sit in the tub and chill out for a minute. And I think it's giving myself permission to rest, giving myself permission to indulge in things that may seem to be trivial or time consuming or inconsequential, but for me, make me happy, make me smile, any number of those things.
Yeah. That's wonderful. I love that you are making sure that your kids know that you are a person before you're a mother, in a way, especially your daughter, who you're not just a helper, right? I think a lot of times you can get caught up in the role as a woman, like that you're here to help other people. You're here to always nurture. You're not just a professional nurturer. That's not your function for other people. You're a person.
And there are moments when you need to be selfish. Like as much as I talk about my faith and things like that, I know the Bible says that the woman was created to be a helpmeet. I also recognize that it's patriarchy.
Yeah.
I mean, I personally don't have those conflicts. And I think just because I've been exposed to so many different types of spiritual practices, I recognize the patriarchy and the sexism and the racism in the Bible as much as I recognize it in any other form of practice. And so I take what I need, I take what has worked for me, and I develop a spiritual practice that works for me. And
that's so powerful. Yeah.
And I rely on that because, at times when I was going through the divorce, and even at times during my marriage, my faith was all I had. I felt like God was all I had. And so, I hold on to that very tightly.
Yeah. That's so empowered of you. Like, I feel like I do the same thing. I know that this tradition is mired in patriarchy, but you know what? This helps me, and this helps me. I'm going to take those things. And I think there are a lot of faiths that kind of look down on that. They're like, well, don't just pick what you need. You have to take the whole thing. And I think at some point in my history, I was like, no, I need to do what I need to do. And so that's wonderful. That's really powerful. Would you mind just kind of touching on, in your Untold Stories talk, like you talked about your background in news and how hearing the stories of police brutality, violence against young people, that just how negatively it was affecting you. Can you just talk about that change, like what you did to kind of like change your, change the way you saw the world or worked in the world because of it?
For sure. So I was a television news producer for 11 years. And 8 of those years were in Jacksonville, Florida. And so as a producer, the job is to write the scripts for the anchors, write the intros for the reporters, choose the video, pick the stories that are going to fill the newscast outside of the reporter stories that are fronted by a reporter, and basically like create the arc of the show with the news of the day. And so I'm looking at video all the time. I'm reading stories all the time from the AP, from Fox, CNN, NBC, ABC, whoever. CNN, you're just taking in a lot of different types of stories. And so and in local news, you have your local stuff. So it's the city council meetings, the elections, if there's an election, school board type of stuff. If there's some crime, you have the crime stories, all of that. And then there's also a mix of national news. And so you need to be aware of a lot, and you need to know a little bit about a lot of things, right? And so, when I started working in Jacksonville, it was 2011. The next year, 2012, Trayvon Martin was killed, Jordan Davis was killed. And those stories of those boys, they never left me. And I would think about them. And it was part of those stories is what led to the focus of my debut novel, even though it's about women. And that was only because I was like, if this is happening to Black boys and Black men, it must be happening to Black women, because that's just the way the world works. And of course it was. And so, by that time, those were like the first two that I could recall. But I know people may recall Sean Bell from New York, or Amadou Diallo, which inspired Bruce Springsteen's song 41 Shots, right? So there's a long history of this happening, but now we're in the age where cell phones have cameras and everybody has a cell phone with a camera. So not only is it happening, but it's being caught on video over and over and over again. And that video is released to who? Television news. Over and over and over again, every single time. And to do my job, I was required in a way to watch them. And I said it during Untold Stories, and I'll say it again. It was the story of Keith Lamont Scott in North Carolina. And I think it was more than just the shooting video. I think it was because his wife was off camera, but you heard her voice. And I heard her scream that when the shots finally went off in the video that I'm watching to do my job, to write the story for the anchors to go on the news that night, something that I didn't even know was in me broke, and I just started crying. And like, you don't cry in a newsroom, okay? Like, it's one of those types of like you get your shit together and you do. Like, there's no crying in baseball. There's no crying in right?
Channel your masculine energy and keep it.
And I mean, I was not okay. And I remember spinning around away from the screen, running into the bathroom at the front of the newsroom, and just like letting it all out, and then coming back. I was like, I'm not watching these anymore. Like, I don't care what my job is. I don't care what I'm asked to do. I'm not watching this anymore. And I don't. Like, I heard about the story of Ralph Yarl, and everybody's flooding the timelines with this picture of him in the hospital. Like, I don't want to see that. And I don't want to see the videos. And what bothers me, I think, the more that I think about it, is just like in the early 20th century, especially during the Red Summer of 1918, 1919, 1920, where it's hundreds of lynchings across the country. And then the Klan would send postcards with white people standing around this Black body that's been burned or hung or dismembered or whatever, that's been lynched. And we're doing the same thing by showing these videos of Black men and Black women and Black boys and Black girls being brutalized. And I understand that for so long, Black people haven't been believed. So you got to show the video to be like, see, it's happening to us. Believe us, believe us, believe us, believe us, believe us. But there is a tie, I believe, to those lynching letters and postcards that used to go out, and the surveillance videos of Black men, women, children, and boys being released to the media for public consumption, that the dehumanizing continues. And so whether people admit it or not, your brain is being trained and conditioned to not see that as human, or to just be desensitized enough that you can disassociate yourself from it and not empathize. And that's problematic. That's problematic. So I try really, really hard not to engage with that type of content. And because of the platforms that I have, the work that I do, the things that I write about, I can't help but be drawn to some of it and like try to know. But I really try to protect my mind and my spirit from those stories. So yeah, I know about what happened to Ralph. I do. I don't want to watch it. I don't want to watch his murderous, he wasn't killed, but I don't want to watch the trial. I don't want to hear all the commentary. I just want to know, is this boy going to get better? Is he going to be able to play his saxophone again? How are his siblings that he was going to pick up that he never made it to? How are they doing? those are the things that I care about. Like, I don't want to carry the trauma anymore and have stories that don't leave me alone, because it doesn't feel good, right? And there's science that says, in Black Americans' bodies, we still carry the trauma of our ancestors from enslavement. And so all the things that are happening now, it's just more on top of that. That's why our lifespans are shorter. That's why our predisposition to certain debilitating diseases is so much higher. That's why during COVID, we had such a high rate of death among our community. And that's documented, and that's scientific, and that's not just me spewing, what I want to say. Like, I've written those stories, I've talked to the researchers and the scientists and done that research. So, like, I don't want to take in pain.
Right.
I don't want that to live in my body. And, especially on the other side of my divorce, I am very clear about anything that I don't want to do, I don't want to watch, I don't want to be a party to. I don't have to.
You don't.
I don't have to.
Yeah, you don't. I think the questions that you were asking about what you do want to know about Ralph Yarl is, it nurtures, it feeds your empathy. You said you want to know if he's going to get better. You want to know if he's going to play his saxophone again. And I think that's the difference between you and somebody else in the newsroom who may have not been able to stay with their body, with their, you were traumatized because by watching all of that. But I think many of us just learn to just kind of hold it in and just, soldier forward. So I think that was so significant for you because you were able to hold on to your empathy, hold on by almost like letting the trauma in, acknowledging it and figuring out a different way rather than just, well, we got to do this. This is, this is our, this is just how our world works. Yeah. So that's, that change, that pivot probably, changed the course of your life as a spiritual person too, in a lot of ways you could have reacted in a different way.
I think so. I think spiritually, you just pray. I just pray, like, my heart aches when I see the stories of what's still happening, and you just kind of rock and sway and pray like, oh God, that's sometimes all I got.
I just go back to your first comment. The world is trash. I mean, it's true. It's true, but we can also be like beautiful people within that trash heap. It's gonna, we can make our own little space clean.
Yeah.
I'm so curious to know, just because I follow Trisha Hersey of the Nap Ministry on social media a lot, and I just love her movement. I'm just curious to know what you think of that, kind of like the relationship between joy, resilience, and empowerment, or specifically for Black women, and when it comes to rest and relaxation.
Man, when I tell you that Trisha and the Nap Ministry, when they start posting those things on Instagram, I feel dragged by my scalp. Like, it resonates so much. Like, and it is empowering to say, disengage from grind culture, disengage from capitalism, and rest.
Yeah.
Because there's one thought that could be like, who has time for that? Right? That's your capitalism talking. Or, thinking that, I think when you think about rest and you think about relaxation, you also have to talk about worth and value.
Yeah.
Because especially in our country where you only may get 14 days of vacation a year, and then you're not even expected to take those full 14 days, right?
Yeah.
So and then you're working at a job where you're paid just enough to pay your bills, but make sure that you show up on Monday morning and punch that clock. So we're in this cycle where rest, relaxation, vacation is a goal, but it's almost unattainable because we're not paid what we're worth. We're not valued. And in turn, even in like this massive entrepreneurship, we don't value ourselves and we don't pay ourselves what we're worth so that we can rest.
Right.
Right. So what Trisha is doing, and I don't know the full doctrine and the full dogma of the Nat ministry, but I think what she's doing is trying to tell Black people, Black women, and anybody specifically that you can rest right now. You don't have to wring yourself out for corporations, for jobs, for bosses, that if something happens to you, will replace you and not even send flowers to your funeral, right? Mm-hmm. They will send their thoughts and prayers and be on their way by posting their job on LinkedIn, okay? So I admire the Nat ministry, and it has gotten me to rethink about how I do the things I do, what I do, and things like that. So like you mentioned, my podcast, Black and Published.
Yeah.
For this specific season, I'm in season 3. I launched the Tuesday before Labor Day with the trailer. New episodes dropped the Tuesday after Labor Day. So like September 6th, okay. I've had a new episode every week with the exception of 2 weeks in December since September 6th. And I'm going until Memorial Day. So that's like 36 episodes. No, my last episode will be June 6th. It's a lot.
That's so much.
And it's a podcast about reading and writing and books. So I read every book, every interview that you heard from this season. I've read every book. And so I was talking to some coworkers. I was like, I'm getting ready to go on hiatus for the podcast, but I don't know if I should come back in September like I did before, or if I should just do a longer hiatus and come back in January. And, they were talking to me about it. And I was like, I'm going to come back in January. I need a break.
Yeah,
I need a break. So after I finish talking to you, I have a podcast interview today. I have one more tomorrow. That will be the last interview of the season. I will have like 6 episodes to upload to my server. Most of them are edited with the exception of the 2 that I still have to like conduct. And then like once those episodes are uploaded and done, I'm on hiatus. Like that's what I'm talking about. Like, looking at the Nat ministry has gotten me to rethink about always being on, always being present, always doing something for the sake of looking like I was busy, especially when I was an indie writer. It's like I was always trying to do something to get some attention, to get an interview, to go somewhere with my books to get attention because I was self-published.
Yeah.
And thankfully now, I've had a book that came out with LSU Press. I recently signed with a talent agent, a literary agent. And so we're trying to work doing my writing career in a different way. But in part of that was me saying, you know what? It's too much for me to do by myself on my own all the time at this stage in my writing career. And I'm 7 books deep. Like I didn't just start.
Right.
I'm not just saying it's like, I got one book and I'm tired. No, I've been in the trenches with this writing thing and like self-publishing and all of that. And so like that, even that decision to say, I need to find an agent. I need to do this in a different way. I need to grow and expand and elevate in a different way that doesn't require so much of my own labor.
Right.
Is I can attribute to what the Nat ministry is doing and saying, I need rest.
Yeah.
I desire to do less. And like one of the rules that I have is that I don't do work on Sunday. I don't care what it is. I don't do work on Sunday. I shut my computers down. Like if I have something to do, even if I have to do something on a Saturday, that's fine. But Sunday morning, those computers are shut down. I don't open them. I don't check them. I don't, nothing.
That's a great practice. I love that.
They don't come back up until Monday when I have to log on for work. So I don't do work on Sunday. I make sure that day, I don't do laundry. I do laundry. I try to do all my house chores on Saturday. Sunday, I don't do anything but go to church, make dinner for myself and my family. And if we're going to hang out, whatever we're going to do, chill out, that's what we do. But I don't do work on Sunday. Like establishing those boundaries and giving myself permission to say, I'm resting.
Yeah.
And that is foreign to me in a lot of ways, where I sometimes have anxiety where it's like, I don't have nothing to do. I don't have anything to do. But I make myself sit with that discomfort and acknowledge and say, why are you uncomfortable being not busy? Why are you uncomfortable being still or doing nothing or letting your mind wander wherever it wants to go? Like, now, sometimes I will read a book, and reading for me is both work and pleasure. So that's kind of, it's a good thing and it's not. But like after this, like with me getting ready to go on hiatus, anything that I read will be something that I want to read, not something that I'm reading for an episode to like evaluate and interrogate the author, right? So it's setting small boundaries in any way that you can. So just like we talked about joy being resistance, rest is a type of resistance, and it's a giving back to yourself and, you know, expanding on what we talked about earlier about self-care. Rest is a form of self-care.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I remember, you know, discovering you were a podcaster. So of course I was looking up your podcast, and I was like going through, I was like, oh my goodness, that makes me tired. Like, that is a lot of work. That's a lot of work. So I'm so happy to hear that you're implementing a hiatus and some rest. That's really good. And and speaking of, you know, time and rest and, you know, your own podcast, let's go ahead and wrap up here, because I have gotten so much good information from you. Just like I'm just like thinking about like editing it. I'm like, I won't need to edit much. Your message is so clear and powerful. I love it. Thank you. So yeah, I think I wanted to talk about, definitely. I want to talk about this with all my guests. And by the way, you do such a great job introducing your guest. I love your intro to your podcast. You do such a good job. You know, like, that's such a wonderful gift as a podcaster, and you do such a good job of that.
That's the TV background in me.
I know you're a professional for sure.
That's the TV background in me. Yeah.
Yeah. So I want to know how you might, and this is, you know, present and future, but how do you use your platform, like your voice as a Black female author and just a role model in your community, to inspire others to, like, you know, encourage joy and rest and relaxation and just like indulging, and how do you see yourself doing that, fostering a sense of playfulness and joy in your life?
I think for me, it's about being honest. It really comes down to being honest. So like, if you go to my social media pages, especially like recently, like, yeah, you'll see the posts about my work, the podcast, the articles I've written, the books, whatever. But like, if you were following me at all this weekend, you saw a lot of my shenanigans.
I saw it. I saw you were going to the beach, because I was going to the beach. I was like, yeah.
I was at the beach. I was at parties. I was at the concert. So, and I want to be honest about that. Like, yes, I write about serious things. I write about heavy topics. I can have an opinion on politics, on race, on culture, on class, on all these things. But I also want to go outside and I want to dance and I want to toot it up and I want to shake it a little bit and have a drink and have a cocktail and have a really good time. And I think that being able to be fully human and do all of those things and have the full breadth of my humanity on display and being unapologetic about it. Like, because I went out and had a good time with friends doesn't make me any less intelligent. It doesn't make me any less poised or polished. It doesn't make me anything. It means I went out and I had a good time, and I deserved that. And so being honest about that, I think, is one way that I want to show up, especially for girls, especially for my daughter, and say, you can do all things.
Right.
You could be a rocket scientist and you could be dancing on tables, and one doesn't diminish the other.
Right.
And I think we have this concept of womanhood and of femininity that it's supposed to be quiet and closed and contained and in support of and nurturing, as you mentioned earlier, and in service to male ego, or even the male gaze. Like, if we get dressed up and we go out, it's not for ourselves. Oh no, it's so that we can be looked at by men. And that's not what it's about. half the time, most of the time, if at all ever, right? So, I mean, I just want to show up honestly and in my fullness and be that.
That's wonderful. I love that. I mean, it's so important because you're right. There are so many other things that we think we do. We're doing these things for other people, but like once you figure out, oh my gosh, I can do this for myself. I deserve to do all of these things. And life is so big. It can be so big. So that's beautiful. I really want you to tell me about any upcoming projects that you have, anything you want to talk about. Like, I want to know.
I can't say it. Like
you can't.
I have a manuscript that I've worked on for a couple of years. My agent I just finished revisions. I finished revisions before I went out of town. So my agent's been rereading through it. I think we're going to go on submission May 1st. So what's that? 2 weeks from now or something like that to the publishers. And so like, that's the biggest thing. And I'm just hoping that it's a good process.
Yeah.
So, you know, like that's the biggest thing. So when it is announced, I'll email you and let you know that, hey, this is the thing, it's coming.
Let me know.
That's one of the things. And then in support of that project, I recently won a fellowship and another grant. So, I mean, I'm just really grateful.
Congratulations.
Thank you. I'm
That's
really
amazing.
grateful with where the writing is taking me these days.
Yeah. Well, good luck on the submissions process. I know that can be nerve-wracking, but and thank you so much for joining me today. I am so inspired. Like, yeah, there's so much that resonates, you know, so much that's just so relevant. And I appreciate you taking time for my podcast.
No problem. Anytime.
Thank you for joining us today. Nikesha covered so many important ways of just showing up in the world as a woman, as a mother, and just as a creative human being. I'm so grateful to have her on the show. And I just wanted to mention some authors that we talked about in this interview, just good resources. So first is the Book of Essays by Tracy Michelle Lewis Giggets. It's the book Black Joy that Nikesha mentioned at the beginning. And then we also talked in a little more detail about Tricia Hersey's Nap Ministry. And her book is titled Rest is Resistance. So these are just two resources that dig in deeper to some of the themes that we touched on here. And don't forget to follow me at Book of Lifeyness on Instagram, where I post more ideas and resources like these. If you're in the Jacksonville area, there is another Untold Stories performance coming up on June 8th at the beautiful Florida Theater here in downtown Jacksonville. Check it out. I hope to be there. And until next time, have a joyful day and a relaxing evening.